So I try to do things, I want to promote peaceable dialogue and understanding.
Yeah, you didn't do that, though. You started off your video with a snarl at dispensationalists, you filthy Gnostic weasel.
And especially try to distinguish what are the first-rank issues you have to believe as a Christian from, say, the third-rank issues. They're not hills to die on. And so that's what I want to go through in this video. And especially what I want to try to distinguish here is what kinds of preterism are first rank. They really mark the difference between orthodoxy and heresy. They're distinctively Christian views versus non-Christian views. Versus what are the things where we can agree to disagree. They're not hills to die on. So in this video, let's do three things. Let's distinguish between two different kinds of preterism, full preterism and partial preterism. One of these things I think is a matter of heresy. The other I think is totally not.
No, so if we use the Church Fathers, then there is no version of preterism we can consider Christian. None.
Let's just distinguish between full preterism and partial preterism. Sometimes these are called, so partial preterism, sometimes it's called moderate preterism or orthodox preterism. Full preterism is sometimes called consistent preterism, hyper preterism, radical preterism. All these terms are disputed in the debates.
Just partial preterism and full preterism. That's fine. That's how I always heard it.
Full preterists believe, try to wrap your head around this, all the eschatological events of the New Testament were fulfilled in the first century. We are currently living in the new heavens and on the new earth. Jesus' second coming was not a bodily event at the end of history. It was a spiritual return manifested in judgment on Jerusalem in 70 AD especially. And the final resurrection took place spiritually toward the latter portion of the first century. And this would be basically, I think we can safely say this is a first-rank issue. This would be heretical.
So Gavin apparently thinks full preterists are damned. How nice. Look, here's the truth, Gavin. Neither full preterists nor partial preterists are damned, okay? Full preterists and partial preterists are both saved. And so full preterists are saved. Full preterists are saved. All right. Say it. You say it, Ortland. Full preterists are saved.
This view cannot affirm the Apostles' Creed, that Christ will come to judge the quick and the dead.
All right. So the Apostles' Creed is from the 4th century. And people say it derives from baptismal formulas from an earlier time, and maybe there's some truth to that. But essentially, this is a 4th century creed we're talking about. And I have two problems with that. Okay. First of all, and most importantly, the Holy Spirit had ceased before these creeds were ever formulated. So these creeds were formulated by men who didn't have the Holy Spirit. Second of all, the fact that men were producing creeds means that a man-made religious entity had emerged. This organized Catholic Church had emerged. This would have to come about in order for there to even be creeds being written. So they're late. All creeds are late. These men didn't have the Holy Spirit, and they were apostates. They denied the kingdom, the resurrection of the just, and so forth. They were teaching apostate mystical concepts in place of the original teaching. They're already apostate. Why would I care about creeds these men were writing? Why should anybody care about these dumb creeds? You can take those creeds and flush them right down that toilet hole where they belong.
I think there are two reasons why I would very emphatically classify this as a first-rank issue, that is to say heretical, that is to say outside of Christian orthodoxy, that is to say not Christian. One is the way Paul classifies Hymenaeus and Philetus in 2 Timothy 2. Okay, this is a view people were saying at that time as well. And he says they have swerved from the truth, saying that the resurrection has already happened. this tells you categorically what kind of error this would be.
So that's an interesting argument, but I think you need to keep in mind that Paul was condemning a teaching going around well before AD 70. So I think what a full preterist would tell you here is that Paul was condemning the notion that was apparently spreading around that the indwelling of the Holy Spirit exhausted our resurrection expectations. So this may not necessarily cause the problem for full preterism that strikes you at first as you read it. Because the full preterists, at least some of them, at least this one I knew going, this goes back some time back in the days when I hung out at the Carm website and discussed stuff on the discussion boards there. I met this wonderful fella, my friend, and his username there, his handle was Second Coming. And this was just a fantastic fella. And he was a full preterist. And he told me that at AD 70, the dead came to life. So at AD 70, he thinks the state of the dead changed. That the dead before that time were just dead and in the grave, and they came alive in a spiritual sense at AD 70. And those that were living and believing at that time were instantly changed. They would have disappeared. He thought the rapture had happened already. In fact, that's how he would explain that these early Christians all still held Jewish concepts, because he would say they were wrong. So the Christians that were left behind were these men holding a Jewish view. That's how he explained this church history. Think about that. It's a it's a clever handling of the data, if I must say so myself. And it's a whole lot better than Gavin Ortland's Fantasyland, where he has preterists running around the first century. That never happened. It's like Hank Hanegraaff's fiction book. Is that why you're a preterist, Gavin? Because you read Hank Hanegraaff's fiction book, and so now you believe that for your doctrine? By the way, if you're enjoying this video, please give it a like and share it with a friend and subscribe to the channel and comment. Please comment below. All said and done. Look, the full preterist view on just what happened at AD 70 is it's a little more complicated than some people realize. They think the resurrection happened then, and it's been going on ever since. And so when people die today, they just instantly transfer into the spiritual realm. As a spirit, though, they leave their bodies behind. They don't just vanish. And I'll explain a little something about that here in a minute.
The other big reason is 1 Corinthians 15 and the way Paul classifies a rejection of the bodily resurrection. And I would say, to use Paul's language, to affirm full preterism is to swerve from the truth and make your faith futile.
Yeah, right. So if the dead are not raised, then not even Christ is raised. And it sounds like our resurrection will be just the same as Christ's, right? And you can go to like Mark 16:6 to show that Christ's tomb was empty. Why? Because he got up and walked out. He came back to life. This seems like an insurmountable problem for the full preterist, because if we're all raised the same way, then today, at the moment a believer dies, they should just disappear because they are resurrected, right? That's what it would seem. But to the best of my understanding, and this would only speak for some full preterists, there's variety of opinion out there. But the one idea that I've heard is that really there's two ways in which people are raised. One way is that the dead are raised. The other way is that the living believers are changed. These are two ways that people are raised. So in 1 Corinthians 15, they would say you can't go too far with this idea that if the dead are not raised, then Christ isn't raised either. Sounds like we're all raised the same way. You can't go too far with that, they would say, because there are two ways in which people are raised. And then when it comes to Christ's resurrection, they would say, even though he was dead, he was brought back to life, but then glorified afterward. So he was resuscitated, then changed. Is that unlike the way others are raised? Yeah, it is. It is. It would make Christ's resurrection unique, kind of like he experiences both types, something like that. You're going to hear explanations. You're going to hear various explanations to this that want to look at it that way, that there's different ways of being raised. And I don't know, this is a difficult little issue in full predators, and this is a tough little area. But is it insurmountable? Is it impossible? I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know.
We have to be able to use the word heresy sometimes. It's not unloving to set boundaries to orthodoxy because we are just basically saying Christianity is not everything. Okay, there are some things you just have to believe.
Yeah, well, what do you even mean by heresy, Gavin? So you think full preterists aren't saved? Well, I have some good news for you. Full and partial preterists are saved. Okay? I mean, I can appreciate that Gavin looks at it this way. Bless his heart.
There are some things you just have to believe.
He thinks there's crucial doctrinal points people have to embrace to be safe. Folks, there's no doctrinal points you have to get right to be saved. God knows your heart. You don't have to get things right to be saved. That's just incorrect. And the truth is, when you start looking at things the right way, you realize that God's plan is going to help so many more people than someone like Gavin can understand. So Gavin, you're in a theology that has a pretty gloomy outlook, but thankfully it's not true.
And the reason I hate full preterism, it just completely vitiates all of our hope.
No, it doesn't. They say that the dead came alive in AD 70, and from henceforward, immediately at death, you're raised, you're judged. Well, the righteous depart to heaven, the wicked to punishment. There's not much difference between what they believe and what the common church attending Christian believes.